In this section, ladies and gents, we are going to talk about one of the most interesting and colorful astronomers in history, and his name is Tycho Brahe. Now, Americans pronounce this Tycho Brahe. It is actually a Danish name, and if you speak Danish, come teach me how to say his name correctly, because I've heard it pronounced many, many ways, but this is the most common way it's pronounced. Tycho Brahe was a Danish astronomer of late 1500s right up to about 1601 when he passed away. Brahe existed before telescopes, long before telescopes, and he was a child of a rich family. In those days, to be educated at all, you had to have rich parents, basically. When he was a young man in 1540, very, very young, he actually saw a predicted solar eclipse. And the fact that someone could predict in great detail exactly when a solar eclipse would occur knocked his socks off. And Brahe was so impressed, he decided to spend his entire life doing astronomy. His die was set for the rest of his life. Brahe was a very, very smart fellow. He was a very, very good mathematician, but he had a big personality, really big personality. When he was a university student, we're talking the late 1500s here, people actually engaged in duels. And he and another student had a duel over who was the better mathematician. And this was a sword fight, just like something from the Robin Hood movies. And Brahe lost the tip of his nose in that duel. And I honestly have never heard what happened to the other guy, so I don't know for sure. But what happened is that for the rest of his life, Brahe wore a prosthetic nose. He had a metal nose that he wore over the bridge in order to cover up the unsightly wound. What color was the nose? Some people say it was silver, some gold, some sort of a copper alloy, and it's believed today he had many noses and he swapped them out for special and for everyday. Brahe was very, very, very talented, and he was an excellent naked eye astronomer, meaning there were no telescopes. Telescopes had not been invented yet. So all of the observations had to be made with the naked eye. In order to get good positions of stars and planets, though, you need sextants, and sextants are large angle measuring devices. This picture here is an illustration of what some of Brahe's sextants looked like. And they could be many stories high, 2 or 3 stories high. Most of them were protected by side walls so they wouldn't be beat on by the wind. And Brahe would sleep all day, and then all night he and his little minions and helpers would observe the night sky and record data. He became very influential in Denmark, his home country, so much so that the King of Denmark gave him his own island, and he built a palace of the universe on this island. The only problem with it is that it was very, very expensive, and Brahe wasn't bringing in any money. He was bringing prestige into Denmark, but not any money. And the king got a little frustrated with him after a while. The other thing about Brahe is that it's reported he treated this island like his own kingdom, and that he was downright mean to people. He was kind of a wild party animal and wasn't nice to the serfs and the people that worked the island. And when eventually he got thrown off of the island and out of Denmark by the new king, once the old king died, the people that used to work for him literally tore the castle down because of the fact that he was such a terrible, terrible ruler. While Brahe was doing these observations, he eventually hired an assistant, and the assistant was a gentleman named Johannes Kepler. Well, Johannes Kepler, also very important in the history of astronomy. Kepler was the polar opposite of Brahe. Brahe was the party animal, and Kepler was very pious, very religious German gentleman. He had actually been persecuted and sent out of Germany, and he eventually found a job with Brahe. Kepler was a mathematical genius, and he could take Brahe's data and make sense out of it. Brahe was good at collecting the data, but Kepler could actually make sense out of it and see mathematical patterns in it. He was a highly pious and religious man, and his goal was to seek God in the perfection of the heavens. Well, the old king of Denmark, as I mentioned, passed away. The younger king, the son, when he took over, he kicked Brahe out. Brahe was kind of, as I mentioned, this party animal, not nice to his servants and expensive to have around. So he said, just get out of Denmark. We don't want you anymore. Brahe and his new assistant Kepler moved to the court in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And in Prague, he became the court astronomer to a different king. And why would a king want a court astronomer? Well, in those days, they did a lot of astrology and were predicting the future using horoscopes. So the idea was if you had a good astronomer, you would have an insight into what was going to happen in the future. We now know that that's a bunch of hooey, but in the day, 500 years ago, that's what people believed. After having been in Prague for less than a year, Brahe was at a fancy smancy dinner party. And the story goes like this. He did not get up and urinate. Why didn't he? One version of the story is that it was considered impolite to leave a court function when the king was still there, even if you really had to go potty. One way the story goes is that he was drunk as a skunk and drunk out of his mind, and because of that didn't get up and go potty. Whatever happened, Brahe ended up with a burst bladder and an infection. He died of this horrible internal infection about 11 days later. So he'd only been in this new country for about a year when he passed away. For many, many, many years, it was assumed or speculated that maybe, just maybe, Kepler had killed Brahe, because Brahe was such a pain and Kepler was such a nice guy. A lot of people thought Kepler should have done him in because he was just mean to everybody he encountered. This rumor persisted for hundreds and hundreds of years, so that back in 2010, they actually exhumed Brahe's body, and they did a post-mortem on his remains, and it was determined that he was not poisoned. It was really assumed for a long time that Kepler had just poisoned his boss, but there was no physical evidence to say that. So probably the bladder infection is the thing that really got Brahe and done him in. So where does that leave us in our story? Johannes Kepler, this pious mathematical genius, is now in the employ of Emperor Rudolf of Czechoslovakia, and he now has access to Brahe's data. Now, Brahe's data was actually supposed to go to Brahe's heirs, and Kepler may have been a religious man, but he was a scientist first, and so he stole the data from Brahe's estate and used it to try and explain the heavens, because Kepler understood the data where almost nobody else on the planet was going to understand the data. Kepler eventually became the imperial astronomer, and using Brahe's data, he came up with 3 laws of planetary motion that are pivotal to our understanding of astronomy, and we will talk about those next.